Chapter 1. The Blood Moon Night and the Exile Collar. The wind howled through the dull gray stone watchtowers of the Stormclaw Pack, carrying the bone-chilling cold of the winter mountain peak. Today was the night of the full moon, a night that was supposed to be filled with sacredness and pride for Eluna. However, the midnight silence of the square did not bring a sense of romance. It carried the scent of death. The crunching sound of footsteps on the snow echoed from the end of the square, breaking the terrifying silence. Isolde turned around, her silver eyes, as brilliant as shattered moonlight, lighting up with a fragile ray of hope. Chaol stepped forward. He was still tall, still majestic in his pitch-black wolf fur cloak, every step exuding the overwhelming aura of a pack leader. Alara, she wore a brilliant red silk dress, a glaring, provocative, and ridiculous color amidst the harsh winter night. The pure white fox fur cloak draped loosely over her shoulders further accentuated her haughtiness. "Chaol, what is this?" Isolde's voice trembled, shattering in the cold wind. Her throat was bitterly choked, feeling like swallowing glass shards. She tried to take a step forward and reach out her hand, but the instinct of a sharp silver wolf promptly spoke up, pulling her to a halt. "Stop putting on that pathetic act, Isolde," Chaol spoke, his deep, hoarse voice not showing the slightest waver or pity. That sound echoed through the empty square, like a death sentence. "Your presence here has been more than enough." Every word, every syllable of his was like poison-laced spears plunging into Isolde's chest, piercing through every fragile defense line she tried to build up. "Cursed? What craziness are you talking about, Chaol? We are mates. Our souls were bound by the moon goddess." Tears welled up in the corners of Isolde's eyes, falling scalding hot onto the freezing snow, leaving behind tiny sunken holes. The moon goddess made a despicable mistake. Chaol roared, his fake fury exploding. The killing intent bursting from him was so strong that it formed a whirlwind, blowing down the surrounding torches. "I am the Alpha, the pregnancy." Isolde's mind spun dizzily, her ears ringing. Alara giggled, a shrill, piercing sound like a crow cawing an omen of death in the dead of night. She glided gracefully forward, her sharp, narrow eyes sweeping over Isolde's trembling figure with extreme contempt. "You heard it clearly, pitiful former Luna." Before Isolde could fully digest the earth-shattering pain, Chaol forcefully swung his hand. From the shadows of the carved ice pillars, 2 tall guards belonging to his private guard dashed out with terrifying speed. From the pocket of his dark woolen cloak, Chaol slowly pulled out a pitch-black object. The air around it seemed to be distorted. What is that? What are you going to do?" Isolde panicked to the extreme, her silver eyes widening in terror, her pupils constricting. She could feel the billowing, cold, foul-smelling evil aura radiating from that object, like the breath of a demon reaching out from hell. "A little parting gift," Chaol smirked, the twisted smile of a demon in human skin, devoid of a single ray of humanity. "I cannot let you carry the defense secrets of the Stormclaw Pack and survive wandering out there. No, Chaol, I beg you, don't be so cruel. If you want me to leave, I will leave. I will give up everything." Ignoring the heart-wrenching pleas, ignoring the past where they fought side by side, Chaol stepped forward coldly and emotionlessly. A dry click resounded, the latch snapping shut, echoing like the sound of a nail being driven into a coffin lid. At that exact moment, Isolde's world completely collapsed. A pitch-black, evil electric current, sharp as tens of thousands of acid-laced needles, injected straight into her veins. Isolde threw her head back and let out a terrifying scream, but the throat-tearing sound had not yet escaped, before being violently blocked by the magical pressure from the collar. "Ah, Kook," she collapsed, smashing her face onto the rock-hard snow. Her body began to convulse violently, curling up like a shrimp thrown into a pan of boiling oil. Macabre cracking and snapping sounds began to echo from deep inside her body. It was not the sound of the smooth, voluntary transformation that werewolves normally did. She gaped, trying to call Chaol's name, trying to cling to a fragile shred of humanity left to anchor her mind from madness. But her larynx had been choked by the dark magic, the magical lava burning away her voice. Gradually, her slender, beautiful human form completely disappeared under the torment of the curse. In its place was a beast, The white wolf lay sprawled there, gasping weakly with every breath. The silver eyes that once shone brilliantly with wisdom, that once contained so much love, were now murky from ultimate agony and streams of humiliating tears. Looking truly pathetic and nauseating, Elara stepped closer, using the pointy tip of her leather shoe to deliver a powerful kick to the white wolf's scrawny ribs. The kicking force of a werewolf sent Isolde flying a few yards away, sliding along the ice surface. Kale stood there indifferently, arms crossed over his chest, looking at the creature gasping for air in a pool of blood beneath his feet. His eyes did not waver, not a single ripple of guilt flashed by. "Clean up this pile of garbage," he ordered, his tone indifferent, as if talking about discarding an extra bone. "Drag it to the edge of the cliff and throw this filthy thing down into the ice abyss." Understood, Great Alpha. The two guards swallowed hard, timidly stepping closer. They cruelly looped a rough, dirty rope around the little wolf's neck, joining the black collar, lifting her upside down and dragging her away, like dragging a sack full of rags. They dragged her a long way across the freezing, sharp stone floor of the square, heading straight towards the edge of the deadly northern cliff. "Goodbye, former Luna." A guard gave a faint smirk, lifting the feather-light body of the wolf high up. Without the slightest hesitation, they swung their arms, throwing her off the cliff. The small, blood-stained, pure white body of the wolf fell freely into the dark void, plunging straight into the gaping mouth of the abyss. The wind, sharp as thousands of razors, frantically tore through the night, howling in Isolde's ears and cutting into her flesh. The ultimate betrayal, the physical pain of being torn apart, and ahead was the endless darkness waiting to crush her soul. Isolde squeezed her heavy eyes shut, relaxing her body. Chapter 2: The Fateful Encounter at the Bottom of the Death Abyss Darkness. A pitch-black, thick, wet, and cold color so intense that it twisted the very space. There was no bird singing, no sunlight or gentle moonlight. There was only the sound of giant snow blocks avalanching with a roar from 10,000 feet above, smashing against the cliffs to create thunderous explosions, along with the groaning and creaking of thousand-year-old ice blocks, cracking under terrifying pressure. In a dark hidden corner at the foot of a sheer blackened mossy cliff, a giant mound of soft snow, formed by thousands of blizzards crashing down, suddenly twitched slightly. A small snout smeared with mud and dried blood poked up from the freezing, pure white snow layer. Isolde laboriously opened her murky silver eyes, gasping for breath. By a grim miracle, an irony of fate, or a cruel joke by some creator, her body in free fall had ricocheted back and forth between the cedar trees growing askew along the cliff, minimizing the falling force, only to finally land precisely onto an incredibly soft and thick snow cushion accumulated from hundreds of years, right at the bottom of the abyssal depth. But the price paid for this survival was so horrific that death might have been more pleasant. Her entire body ached maddeningly, as if tens of thousands of iron-spiked sledgehammers had just continuously smashed down, crushing every segment of bone, every bundle of muscle of hers. She wanted to scream, wanted to tilt her face up to the pitch-black sky to curse Kale for his cruelty, wanted to damn Elara for her vile wickedness, wanted to cry her heart out for the ultimate injustice of fate that had struck her head. Even so, the primal survival instinct of the royal silver wolf bloodline, although suppressed by dark magic and sealed to the lowest, most depleted level, was still stubbornly and silently operating to protect its master. She struggled to use her last remaining strength, using her scraped front paws to claw and dig through the snow, biting her teeth to endure the surging waves of agony, dragging her wound-riddled body to crawl out of the deadly pit she had created herself when falling. She needed to find a cave, a wind-sheltered spot to serve as a refuge. She needed to survive. At the same time, not far from where the little wolf Isolde was laboriously crawling in the murky darkness, a brutal, epic-scale bloody massacre had just ended in an eerie silence. This dark area was not located on the usual patrol route of any wolf pack, but rather the Dead Lands, a dangerous buffer zone bordering the freezing northern territory of the bloodthirsty vampires. However, what awaited him in the hazy mist was not a natural anomaly needing to be sealed, but a perfect trap, incredibly vicious and meticulously calculated by a powerful hidden enemy. Over 50 ruthless mercenary assassins, all with their faces covered in tar, equipped with lethal melee weapons, coated in pure liquid silver and gas bombs containing the most concentrated wolfsbane toxin ever brewed, had lain in ambush ready. Valerius stood there, towering like a god of war, stepping out from hell, standing right in the middle of a battlefield, strewn with the severed corpses of the assassins and the bodies of his brave, loyal warriors. He was the living embodiment of absolute wild strength, of primal brutality bearing a regal caliber. Every creature only needed to feel his breath to bow down flat. A specially designed sword coated in liquid silver had successfully launched a sneak attack, piercing through his left ribs, tearing apart his iron armor-hard muscle layer, leaving a pitch-black, deep wound. The charred flesh continuously bubbled with a sizzle, emitting plumes of smoke carrying a harsh burning smell. Wolfsbane was not merely a poison, it was a fatal weakness, the biggest nightmare of a werewolf. And with this unprecedentedly concentrated level, even the resilient bloodline of the Lycan King was gradually being defeated, losing its rapid self-healing ability. Damn scum, Valerius let out a low growl from deep within his chest. That powerful sound was filled with fury, sending a resounding tremor crashing into the cliffs, causing the thick snow layer high above to peel off and fall down like a white rain. His breathing was heavy and broken, each exhale carrying tiny specks of blood. Valerius's normally sharp vision began to blur and fade, with black and red patches swirling wildly before his eyes. Would he, Valerius, the invincible king, die all alone in this hell on earth? In this cursed dark corner unbeknownst to anyone? About half a mile away, cutting through the thick fog and the biting wind, the extremely keen nose, the only remaining vestige of the silver wolf power, of the little white wolf twitched continuously. Isolde stopped her staggering steps, temporarily forgetting the bone-deep aching pain throughout her body. Her small, torn ears pricked up high, catching the chaotic streams of information from the blowing wind direction. But, hidden deep beneath the foul scent of death and that chaotic massacre, Isolde recognized an incredibly strange scent, completely overwhelming everything else. The little white wolf's heart suddenly fluttered wildly, beating so hard her chest wanted to burst. Discarding all the inherent caution of a wounded prey, disregarding even the mortal danger threatening ahead, Isolde gritted her small teeth, dragging her wobbly footsteps with sheer determination towards the blood-soaked battlefield. When her tiny body slipped through the gap of the giant ice rocks sharp as demon fangs, the cruel, horrific scene of the battle opened up before her eyes. The white wolf hurriedly pressed herself timidly against the cold surface of an ice block, her round silver eyes widening in ultimate astonishment. But that godlike powerful creature was slowly dying before her eyes. The large wound on his ribs incessantly oozed out a pitch-black, thick blood, bubbling and sizzling as the wolfsbane toxin fiercely attacked. She stood there, hiding in the darkness, but she also knew another miraculous medical secret. She would not allow this great man, with the soul-intoxicating scent, to fall here. Isolde immediately buried her nose into the rubble floor, activating her sense of smell to sniff around desperately. Without a second of hesitation, the white wolf lunged forward, ravenously chewing that rare weed. The bitter, astringent taste rushed up to her brain, freezing cold like holding a 1,000-year-old ice block, thrust straight into her oral cavity, making her whole body shiver violently, her physiological tears welling up uncontrollably. Isolde filled her mouth with the blood-tinged bitter medicine, timidly approaching the giant man, kneeling in the middle of the red snow patch. Although her footsteps were smooth and soft, to the point that the blowing wind was louder, that tiny presence could not bypass the superhuman hearing of a Lycan king, even when he was struggling on the blurry boundary of life and death. But his arm stiffened, stopping permanently in midair. Before his eyes, under the dim light of the fog, it was not a lurking assassin coming to finish him off, but a tremendously tiny, dirty, scrawny, and pitifully sick white wolf. That gaze, strangely enough, easily pierced through the armor of power, through the brutal, bloodthirsty shell of a heartless king, directly touching the softest, deepest part in his soul. In that moment of absolute silence, when Valerius' fiery blood-red eyes touched the surface of Isolde's deep, crystal-clear silver eyes, all the surrounding space and time seemed to completely freeze. Mate, the sacred ancient echo of the moon goddess rang out commandingly, as clear as a roaring thunder in the depths of Valerius's chaotic subconscious. Amidst the fragile boundary of life and death, his lonely soul screamed in joy, obediently bowing its head to accept its master. Isolde, despite being in a tiny body, also felt that soul earthquake. The agonizing pain torturing her whole body suddenly disappeared, melting away like morning dew. Valerius blinked. The instinctive bloodthirsty ferocity completely vanished into thin air, replaced by a gentle bewilderment and a feeling of fatigue, of ultimate peace of mind. His massive arm, full of lethal power, slowly drooped down onto the bruised red snow. Isolde's small heart ached painfully when she saw her mate collapse. She hurriedly lunged forward, jumping up to stand beside his muscular, bronze statue-like body. She felt no disgust, patiently using her rough little tongue to lick around the deep wound, incredibly carefully cleaning away the remaining toxic blood patches, locking the medicinal properties of the herbs into the wound's opening. After the risky healing process was completed, Isolde's tiny body had also exhausted its very last drop of energy, falling into a state of utter exhaustion. The little white wolf with blood-stained fur slowly buckled her front legs, then curled up her tiny, tear-filled body, pressing closely against the solid, fireplace-warm chest of the unconscious Lichen King. Chapter 3: The King's Judgment. The north wind howled through the ancient pine canopy, carrying the bone-chilling cold of the northern tundra, and tearing the dull gray sky into dark streaks of clouds. Amidst the clearing dyed in a dark red color of blood and corpses, Valerius Nightblood slowly opened his eyes. He groaned, a low threatening sound echoing from deep within his chest, shaking the entire silent space. The astonishing self-healing ability of the Lichen King bloodline was frantically operating. He propped his hands up to sit, and then, the breath of the most notorious tyrant king of the Lichen realm suddenly choked. Not far from him, curled up and whimpering beside the root of a giant cedar tree, was a creature he never expected. A white wolf, its fur, or rather hers, because the radiating scent indicated this was a female, was once as pure white as ancient moonlight, but was now mottled with glaring streaks of fresh blood. But what made Valerius's heart skip a beat was not the appearance of a wild beast in the middle of a battlefield, but her gaze. When the weak wolf lifted her head, her deep blue eyes touched his gaze. At the same time, an invisible shockwave suddenly struck Valerius's mind hard. Mate bond, the destined mate connection. Valerius was so shocked that his entire body stiffened. How could it be? The destined mate of a mighty Lichen King, the one carrying the greatest pure bloodline, was actually a white wolf in the form of a wild beast. As for Isolde, she was experiencing ultimate panic under her cursed wolf guise. The pain from the magical slashes was draining her last bit of strength. As he slowly stepped towards her step by step, his firm footsteps crushing the thick snow and resounding with threatening rustles, Isolde tried to back away, but the cruel death did not come. Instead, it was a strange warmth, soothing the chill of the Grim Reaper's scythe. Valerius's giant, burning hot hand touched her pure white fur. "You saved me," Valerius's voice spoke out. The tone was deep and hoarse, echoing like roaring thunder from afar. Yet it contained an unprecedented gentleness towards anyone else. "A tiny, foolish creature, but from today your life belongs to me." He leaned down, not hesitating about her dirty blood staining his torn, luxurious royal attire, and firmly lifted the white wolf into his arms. Isolde's weight was nothing compared to his extraordinary strength. Valerius hugged the wolf tightly to his chest, using his black sheep wool cloak to wrap around her tiny body to shield against the bone-cutting cold. The journey back to the fortress was a persistent battle with the blizzard hurricane. The wind howled as if wanting to tear apart the flesh, but Valerius did not falter at all. The Black Guard, the most terrifying and loyal elites of the kingdom, were already waiting in a neat formation. They wore enchanted black gold armor, their razor-sharp, pure silver weapons always ready to be drawn from their sheaths. "Your Majesty, you are wounded," the assassins, Kaelin exclaimed. But then his falcon-sharp eyes paused, glued to the bleeding cloak bundle in Valerius's arms. The strange blood scent, the wild beast scent heavily radiating out, caused Kaelin's warrior instinct to instantly rise up. Before finishing his sentence, Kaelin had drawn his silver-coated longsword, swinging his arm up, the pointy sword tip, aiming straight at the tiny creature sleeping soundly in the king's arms. The scene suddenly became solidified. The surrounding temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees below freezing. Valerius's eyes, which were calm like a winter lake, suddenly flared up in a blinding blood-red color. Brilliant as volcanic lava, a primal brutal anger surged up. Grrr! A deafening roar, carrying destructive power, burst out from Valerius's chest. It was not a human scream, but the supreme authoritative roar of a primal Lycan king. A terrifying mental pressure, heavy as 1,000 pounds, crashed straight down onto the entire Blackguard squad. Kaelin and over 30 of the most elite warriors could not resist the submission instinct rooted in their bloodlines toward the Supreme Alpha. Whoever, Valerius growled, every word hissing through his sharp teeth, carrying a thick, killing intent that made the blood of those who heard it instantly freeze. Dares to point a weapon at her, that person will lose their head. Right here, right now, he reached out to smooth the cloak sheltering Isolde, who was now trembling slightly because of his powerful roar. From today on, Valerius's voice echoed, roaring across the desolate courtyard, crashing against the stone walls of the fortress. This wolf is my companion. Wherever I stand, that place is her territory. Kaelin bowed his face close to the snow, breaking out in a cold sweat like bathing, despite being in a sub-zero blizzard. Understood, Your Majesty. I deserve 10,000 deaths. Valerius gave a cold snort of contempt, striding past the trembling, kneeling formation of soldiers, heading straight into the main castle. Isolde lay obediently in his arms, her mind swirling with endless thoughts. She was originally taught that the Black Ash Fortress was a hell on earth, where blood flowed into rivers, and the screams of prisoners echoed day and night. Valerius carried her all the way into the royal bedroom, an incredibly vast space with an authoritative black-gray color scheme, minimalist interior yet exuding an ultimate luxuriousness. He gently and carefully placed her on the thickest, softest snow-bear fur rug in front of the fireplace. Valerius ignored calling a royal physician for himself, but instead growled an order for the maids to bring warm water and the most premium herbs. Isolde lay there, obediently letting him care for her, her blue eyes looking at him unblinking. In this grim form, she could not say words of thanks, nor could she hurl curses at him for the blood feuds of their clans. Chapter 4. Venom and the Whisper in the Mind. Since that bloody fateful day, Isolde's life took a completely different turn. A new horizon she never dared to dream of during her days fleeing from the pursuit. The vast, gloomy fortress, with its sturdy, mossy stone walls and endlessly long corridors, now became her free territory. However, behind that unprecedented favor, what made Isolde feel the most unfamiliar and struggle the most was the internal conflict within her wolf body. Whenever Valerius walked into the room, the space seemingly instantly overflowed with his overwhelming, characteristic masculine scent, a perfect blend of solemn cedar wood, cold snowy wind, and a hint of passionate tar. One typical freezing northern evening, when the blizzard outside was frantically lashing against the dull, gray lead-colored glass windows, Valerius was sitting working in the quiet study. The room was bathed in the pale yellow light of dozens of beeswax candles. The rebels in the Black Mountain Range are still stirring to arm themselves, Valerius muttered, tapping his fingers rhythmically on the desk, as if he were discussing tactics with a wise strategist, rather than a pet. Isolde lifted her head from her two front paws, her crystal-clear, calm blue eyes gazing intently deep into his angular face, her head tilting slightly to one side as if listening. Many times I truly feel you are judging and analyzing my strategies, little girl, he whispered, his deep, warm voice creeping into her soul. Your eyes, they have too many unspoken thoughts, too much wisdom to belong to a wild beast. Isolde blinked in confusion, hurriedly turning her head away, dropping her ears to pretend to be a sleepy dog. She could not let him realize too much, not until she found a way to break the evil curse imprisoning her. The heavy study door suddenly rang with 2 respectful knocks, breaking the quiet atmosphere. "Come in." Valerius's voice instantly changed, returning to the everyday cold authoritative demeanor of an emperor. A middle-aged male servant, wearing the fortress's silver-lined servant uniform, walked in silently. Everything at first glance seemed incredibly normal. However, Isolde's ears suddenly stood bolt upright. Piercing through the greasy smell of mutton, the aroma of roasted garlic, and the strong alcohol scent of premium wine, an extremely subtle scent shot straight into her sensitive nose like an acid-laced needle. Isolde stood up abruptly, her 4 paws firmly gripping the floor. The fur on her spine stood on end, bristling like sharp needles. Through the supreme hearing of a wolf, she heard the servant's heartbeat pounding continuously, like rapid war drums. An abnormal heartbeat of someone trying to hide extreme panic and tension. His breathing was shallow, hurried, and broken. "He was a mole assassin. Your Majesty's late-night meal has been prepared, sir," the servant said, trying to keep his voice from trembling, placing the silver tray on an empty corner of the desk, carefully using 2 fingers to lightly push the jewel-encrusted wine glass towards Valerius's right hand to make it convenient for him to grab. "Step back without my order. No one is allowed to disturb," Valerius replied blandly, his eyes still not leaving the tactical map densely covered in symbols. His left hand unconsciously reached out by habit, his fingers preparing to touch the rim of the wine glass filled with venom. "No, don't touch it," the human soul within Isolde screamed to the point of tearing her larynx, but her beast's throat could only emit a choked, hoarse growl. Valerius had just touched his fingertips to the cold jade glass body. With an explosive power surpassing the limits of her muscles, borrowing force from her strong hind legs, Isolde vaulted into the air like a blinding white lightning bolt. Her heavy body mass smashed like a sledgehammer into the edge of the sturdy oak desk. Crash, smash, the sudden and violent collision caused the entire desk to violently shake. The heavy silver tray was hurled into the air, spinning in circles. Not stopping there, before the servant could digest what had just happened, Isolde twisted her body in mid-air, roaring out a fierce, brutal growl, baring her ghastly white, razor-sharp fangs. "Ah!" the servant screamed miserably, the piercing sound tearing through the night. Fresh blood gushed from the bite wound, soaking his sleeve. The study door was instantly kicked open by a violent kick. The dark guard squad patrolling nearby flooded in like a broken dam, their drawn weapons gleaming. "Your Majesty, what happened?" Commander Kalen shouted loudly, leading the charge, his eyes filled with ultimate terror when he saw the chaotic scene. Overturned furniture, scattered documents, and the royal pet tearing into a bloody servant. "The wild beast, damn it, it's gone mad." 3 razor-sharp silver spears were immediately raised high, aiming straight at Isolde's pure white back. Preparing to thrust down, she squeezed her eyes shut, ready to trade a life for a life. But her teeth remained locked shut, biting deep into the enemy's wrist, refusing to let go. "Stop! Everyone step back!" Valerius's voice rang out like a heavenly thunderbolt, striking straight down on everyone's heads, carrying terrifying authority and explosive killing intent that made all the guards freeze in place, their spear-holding hands trembling. The air in the room seemed to be drained, making everyone suffocate. He didn't bother, glancing at the guards, pointing their weapons at his wolf. His eyes were pinned tight, sharp and cold as a razor, onto the stone floor, where the spreading puddle of broken wine was bubbling gruesomely. Sizzle, sizzle, the seemingly harmless amber liquid, upon contact with the air and natural stone floor, began to undergo a demonic chemical reaction. A plume of pale green smoke rose, carrying a disgustingly foul stench like a decomposing corpse. The entire room plunged into a deadly, eerie silence. Only the agonizing groans and whimpers of the servant under the wolf's claws and the brutal, stone-devouring sizzle of the highly toxic poison remained. Valerius walked slowly, step by step towards Isolde and the mole lying flat on the floor. Every footstep of his tapped on the stone floor like the grim Reaper's countdown. The servant was so terrified he lost control of his bowels, the whites of his eyes showing, stammering incoherently, "Your Majesty." "Take this trash down to the 9th water dungeon," Valerius ordered, his voice deep and cold, carrying not the slightest shred of merciful emotion. I want to know who sent him, at all costs, using every most cruel form of torture. The guards instantly snapped back to their senses, dragging away the miserably wailing mole. They hastily cleaned up the mess in trembling fear, then quickly retreated outside, shutting the main doors tightly, returning absolute private space to the king. Isolde slowly released her grip, lifting her paw off the assassin's body. She turned her head, sticking out her tongue to lightly lick the foul, fresh blood streaks stuck on her snout. Valerius was kneeling on one knee on the messy floor, completely unbothered by his cloak hem sweeping across the debris, facing her directly. Isolde's heart clenched, a sweet feeling welling up. The mate bond burned brilliantly, radiating warm energy in that moment of absolute silence. "You're safe, thank goodness," Valerius jumped, stumbling back half a step, almost falling over backward. His sharp eyes glared wide open, his pupils constricting to the max out of sheer shock. What the hell did he just hear? A voice. He stared blankly at the white wolf in front of him as if looking at a miracle. Valerius slowly reached out his hand once again, his giant hand enveloping her tiny face. His fingers lightly touched the delicate lines under her jaw, caressing with full reverence, longing and exploration. "You," his voice was hoarse, shattering by the great truth gradually unfolding before his eyes. He swallowed hard, every word uttered with great difficulty. "You are truly not an ordinary wild beast inside this form. Who are you?" Isolde stood still as a snow-sculpted statue, her melancholic blue eyes looking deep into his fiery red abyss filled with questions. Her biggest, grimmest secret had half of its concealing curtains stripped away. Chapter 5. The Trap in the Peace Offering. The biting winds from the forbidden mountain range howled, tearing the silent night, lashing violently against the monolithic stone walls of the Black Ash Fortress. Every snowflake, sharp as a dagger, swirled in the air, blanketing the Lycan kingdom in a cold, morning color. Valerius sat there in a lazy posture yet exuding a deadly dangerous aura. His eyes a fiery red like fresh blood dripping onto white snow, coldly swept over those kneeling flat below the stone steps. Curled up neatly in the darkness at the foot of the throne, just an arm's reach from Valerius, was a pure white wolf. Her fur bore a brilliantly pure white shade, yet concealed the fatigue and dilapidation of a living being who had undergone countless torments. "Great King of the Black Ash Range," the Stormclaw Pack envoy spoke up, his voice trembling, cold sweat breaking out on his forehead, even though the temperature in the hall was at freezing level. Following a trembling wave of the envoy's hand, 2 attendant soldiers slowly stepped forward, carrying an intricately carved oak box. When the box was opened, a sparkling emerald stone was revealed. However, right at the moment the box was popped open, a strange draft of air shot straight into Isolde's sharp sense of smell. The white wolf's nose crinkled. That was not the scent of the sacred mountain. That was not the scent of pure magic. Beneath that perfect guise, deep inside the core of the emerald stone, Isolde smelled an agonizingly familiar scent. The smell of rancid blood, the smell of rotting flesh in the mud, and time seemed to stand still. The envoy lifted the stone with both hands, dragging respectful steps towards the marble pedestal before the throne. "Don't," Isolde screamed in her mind, but the sound escaping her throat was only a low growl of a beast. She could not speak, could not warn him with words. Right when Valerius's fingers were only a few inches away from the stone, a blinding white lightning bolt tore through the hall's space. Isolde launched herself into the air, with all the strength of her hind legs. The white wolf's body tensed like an arrow, leaving a bow, carrying terrifying force. "What the hell is this crazy wolf doing?" The envoy didn't even have time to finish his sentence. Crash! A deafening explosion echoed, tearing the eardrums of everyone present. The emerald stone, when its shell was broken, released all the dark magic compressed inside. Isolde was too close to the epicenter. The magic shockwave struck her ribs directly. Everything sank into a deadly silence for a split second, before the most terrifying fury arose. Valerius's eyes shifted from a dark red to a burning blood color, brilliant and savage as hellfire. The Lycan power in his body exploded, no longer restrained. "Who dares?" Valerius's roar was no longer a human voice, but a resonant sound of thousands of bloodthirsty beasts tearing out of his throat to escape. His claws lengthened, sharp as the Grim Reaper's scythes. The Stormclaw pack envoy was terrified to the extreme, trying to crawl backward, his eyes glaring wide in sheer despair. King, we didn't know. We truly didn't. Valerius didn't give him a chance to explain. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared from the throne and appeared right in front of the envoy. But the Lycan King's fury still did not stop. His bloodshot eyes locked onto the remaining Stormclaw soldiers. When the last scream died out, Valerius stood in a pool of blood, his chest heaving with heavy breaths. The primal anger was still surging, but a sharp ache from the depths of his soul suddenly pulled him back to reality. He whipped around. The brutal gaze vanished instantly, replaced by an unprecedented panic. "Open your eyes." Valerius's voice was hoarse, shattering, carrying a fear he had never tasted in his entire life. He wrapped his arms entirely around her cold body, pulling her tight against his sturdy chest, trying to transfer warmth from his Lycan body to hers. "Don't die," he roared, a painful cry, echoing throughout the Black Ash Fortress. A roar not of a tyrant showing off his power, but a lament of a lone wolf who had just found the only light of his life, only to witness that light fading away in his hands. Chapter 6. The Crack of the Curse. The royal room located on the highest floor of the central tower, which was supposed to belong only to the absolute silence of the Lycan King, was now reeking of fresh blood mixed with the bitter aroma of herbs. Valerius sat on the edge of the giant bed covered in black silk velvet sheets, his massive silhouette casting long shadows on the stone wall under the flickering candlelight. In front of him, Isolde lay there, tiny, fragile, and motionless. The best physicians of the fortress had been called, but when facing Valerius's bloodthirsty red eyes, they all trembled and backed away. Anyone who touched the white wolf would trigger the frantic possessiveness of the mate bond in him. With an astonishing patience compared to his usual brutal nature, Valerius took a towel dipped in a basin of warm water mixed with rare herbs, carefully wiping away the mud and dried blood on Isolde's fur. Why did he feel this way? Valerius asked himself. "Foolish," Valerius muttered, his warm, deep voice echoing in the silent space. He gently stroked along the wolf's spine, transferring a portion of his Lycan life energy into her body to maintain her heartbeat. "Who needs you to sacrifice yourself to protect me?" When the warm towel moved to Isolde's neck area, Valerius's fingers suddenly froze. He frowned, feeling something unusually stiff and cold, hidden deep under the thick, rough, and blood-matted fur. Valerius's heart sank. With his steady hands, he gently but firmly parted the blood-soaked white fur around Isolde's neck. Valerius's pupils constricted. A draft of cold air ran down the Lycan King's spine. Tightly embedded into the soft flesh, deeply imprinted to the point of oozing fresh blood, was a pitch-black metal collar. It was not merely worn around the neck. The tiny spikes on its inner surface had pierced deep into the bone marrow, taking root in the animal's blood vessels. The dark collar, Valerius hissed through his teeth, his voice containing both extreme shock and utmost fury. He was a Lycan who had lived through many centuries. His knowledge of dark magic forms was by no means little. This collar was not used to chain animals. Valerius's gaze was glued to the wolf's face, the small features, the snow-white fur, and the sharp, brave reaction from earlier. "You are not a wild wolf," he whispered, his massive hand enveloping Isolde's face, his thumb caressing her blood-covered cheek. "The white wolf bloodline, you are a human, a cursed human." The truth was like a punch straight to Valerius's mind. She was a human, a life forced to live in the form of a beast, enduring unimaginable torment. But right now he had to free her. "Don't be afraid," Valerius said softly, pressing his forehead against the wolf's forehead, letting his scent envelop her, reassuring her. "I will take this filthy thing off of you." Valerius slipped his 10 strong fingers underneath the cold metal layer of the dark collar. He closed his eyes, channeling all the primal strength of a Lycan king into his hands. Instantly, the magic from the collar fought back fiercely. The ancient characters glowed in a crimson red. Crack. A crisp sound echoed. The surface of the dark collar formed a long crack. But at the same time, The tug-of-war between the two massive forces had transmitted directly into Isolde's tiny body. The pain exceeding the limits of endurance jolted her awake. Isolde curled her body, a heart-wrenching whimper escaping her throat. Her blue eyes widened in terror and agony. She felt as if her throat was being slashed by thousands of knives, her soul being torn in half. Damn it, Valerius immediately let go, panting heavily. He realized that this magic had rooted too deeply. If he used violent force to break it right now, it would drag her life down with it. A feeling of ultimate helplessness enveloped the brutal king. He looked at his blistered, charred hands, then looked down at the trembling, whimpering wolf on the bed. "I'm sorry," his voice choked up, a pitiful gentleness that no one could expect to appear in a tyrant. "I cannot break it right now. I will hurt you to death." Isolde lay gasping, her whole body soaked in sweat and blood. The physical pain was still tearing at her, but looking into Valerius's red eyes, filled with pity and self-blame, her heart fluttered fiercely. With the last bit of her remaining strength, Isolde laboriously crawled forward. She stretched out her tiny, blood-covered snout. Valerius's body stiffened, the rough, warm sensation from the tip of her tongue touching his burning wounds surprisingly brought a miraculous warmth, soothing the storm in his heart. At that exact moment, a brilliantly yellow light, strangely warm, flared up between the two of them. It did not originate from magic, but from their own souls. Valerius closed his eyes, slowly leaning down, placing a gentle, fully reverent kiss on the blood-soaked forehead of the white wolf. "Sleep, my mate," Valerius whispered, a vicious and ironclad oath deeply carved into the universe. "I swear on the life of the Lycan King, whoever did this to you, I will make him vomit out every drop of blood to pay for his sins." The blizzard outside seemed to falter before the king's oath. In his warm embrace, Isolde slowly closed her blue eyes, sinking into the most peaceful sleep since the nightmare began. Chapter 7. The darkness within the High Council, the judgment at Aethelgard. The sound of shattering glass rang out piercingly, tearing the silent and stifling atmosphere in Chaol's secret office. The prince frantically swung his arm, sweeping everything on the ancient oak desk onto the cold stone floor. Failure, complete failure. Chaol roared, his hoarse voice carrying extreme resentment, his two hands clenching into fists until his knuckles turned pale white, his sharp claws digging deep into his bleeding palms. Sitting cross-legged on the crimson velvet armchair in the darkest corner of the room, Alara lightly took a sip of dark red wine like fresh blood. "You are making yourself lose the demeanor of a future king, dear Chaol," Alara spoke coldly, her tone sweet and soft but laced with deadly venom. "Valerius is the Lycan King. He possesses the primal power inherited from the ancient bloodline." Chaol whipped around, his dagger-sharp eyes pinning tight on Alara, suspicion and jealousy beginning to gnaw at his mind. "That white wolf, it's not a normal animal. She has something incredibly strange. If he has revealed his weakness, then we will stab a fatal knife straight into that exact weakness. If assassination by force fails, we will borrow a knife to kill. The sharpest and most legitimate knife in the Lycan world," Alara whispered into Chaol's ear, her breath carrying the scent of poisonous flowers. "Summon the High Council, the Western High Council." Chaol narrowed his eyes, a wicked, dark idea beginning to sprout and take root in his head. "You want us to file a slanderous petition against him, before the entire council?" "Not slander, my Chaol. That is called a brave act to protect the purity of the Lycan bloodline," Alara chuckled softly, a smile that would make people shudder. A low, savage, and highly elated string of laughter escaped Chaol's throat. He spread his arms to hug Alara tightly, his eyes glowing brightly with frantic ambition and unconcealable lust for power. Such an utterly brilliant plan, Alara. While dark plots were being woven in the hidden corners of the kingdom, over at the Winter Palace, the domain of the Lycan King, the atmosphere was quiet, majestic, and cold to the point that one could clearly hear the sound of fragile snowflakes falling and touching the crystal windowsill. Valerius sat motionless on the throne chair, carved from a giant monolithic ice rock block, holding in his hands a time-dyed parchment roll, tightly tied with a black silk ribbon, and sealed with a blood-wax stamp in the shape of a roaring wolf head, the absolute seal of the Western High Council. the parchment containing sharp words, accusing and suspicious phrases, and the condescending tone of those proclaiming themselves the supreme judges, was crumpled in the palm of his hand. Right at Valerius's feet, on the soft and warm snow-bear fur rug, the white wolf was curling up her tiny body. She whimpered softly, a choked and shattered sound in her throat, then timidly rubbed her wet, cold nose against Valerius's rugged palm. Inside the form of this silent beast, Isolde, the true soul, a maiden carrying the sealed noble silver wolf bloodline, was gnawing on ultimate agony. Her heart clenched as feelings of guilt surrounded her. Valerius seemingly understood every ripple of thought, every bitter pain tearing at the core of the little animal. "Don't be afraid, my little one," Valerius spoke in a low voice, an alluring, hoarse sound like the warm growl of a wild beast, comforting its only mate in a cave amidst the freezing winter. Saying so, he lifted the white wolf into his arms, enveloping her tiny, soft, and slightly trembling body into his muscular, solid chest. He took long, steady strides out of the winter palace. All along the journey crossing the Death Mountains, the blizzards howled ferociously like tens of thousands of angry monsters, wanting to tear apart the heavens and the earth and swallow all living creatures. Trees collapsed, snowy winds slapped freezing cold against the carriage walls. For 3 days and 3 nights relentlessly cutting through the cold snow. Finally, the ancient citadel of Aethelgard vaguely appeared in the thick and gloomy fog. The stronghold was built precariously, on the peak of God's Scar Mountain, the highest and most treacherous mountain of the continent. When the giant ironclad oak doors of the Judgment Great Hall were swaggeringly pushed open by dozens of guards, a gloomy, stifling draft carrying the pungent smell of incense and fear blew straight into Valerius's face. Thousands of sharp gazes carrying all spectrums of emotions, curiosity, suspicion, jealousy, and even unconcealed hostility, simultaneously shot like poison-laced arrows toward the entrance doors as their king appeared. The firm, dull thuds of Valerius's footsteps against the stone floor echoed throughout the great hall. He walked in, his tall, magnificent body exuding an overwhelming aura in a pitch-black royal attire, dotted with sparkling hand-woven silver threads. But what truly made the entire vast great hall instantly erupt into an uproar, bustling with gossip and pointing, was the animal that the Lycan king was calmly holding in his arms, pressed against his chest. A rogue. He actually dares to bring a filthy rogue into our 1,000-year-old sanctuary. A fat alpha in the middle row shouted. "Look at the collar on its neck, reeking of dark magic." The murmurs and gossip grew louder and louder, quickly turning into a noisy wave of anger like a broken beehive, creating an unprecedentedly chaotic atmosphere in this sacred place. Standing at the central podium of the trial, as the one filing the lawsuit, Chaol had his arms crossed over his chest, his lips forming a smug, arrogant smile full of complacency. "Valerius," Chaol suddenly spoke up, his sonorous voice roaring out thanks to voice-amplifying magic, immediately drowning out all the noise in the great hall. Chaol suddenly whipped around toward the 12 elders on the high podium, bowing in a highly theatrical manner, his voice shifting to a tone of tragic grief, sorrow, and eloquence so fake. "Respected High Council, the holders of the scales of justice." In contrast to the agitation and noise of Chaol and the crowd, Valerius did not immediately open his mouth to reply. He remained standing silently, steady as a towering mountain in the center of the great hall. After a suffocating silence, Valerius's eyes finally slowly raised. Chapter 8. The Uprising Blood Moon. The Awakening of the Silver Luna. The terrifying silence, seemingly lasting endlessly, of Valerius not only failed to soothe the situation but, on the contrary, was like a barrel of oil poured straight into the fiercely burning flames of anger of the High Council. Right in the middle of the high podium, a gray-cloaked elder, someone with hair as stark white as snow, and a face covered in crisscrossing war scars from the era of chaos, slowly stood up. He swung his arm, forcefully slamming the base of his dragonbone scepter onto the stone floor. Valerius, seeing that the time was ripe to push the climax of the play, Alara staggered a step forward. Tears fell profusely on her meticulously made-up beautiful face, smudging her makeup, creating an incredibly pitiful appearance. "Respected elders, please look into this for us," she sobbed, her voice trembling and breaking perfectly. That beast, it's not merely a cursed wolf. The blatant lies, ingeniously woven, wrapped in crocodile tears and Alara's masterful acting skills, successfully ignited a massive explosion. The peak fury swept through the entire great hall. Kill it. Behead that evil beast. We cannot let a rogue defile the dynasty. Hang it on the city gates. Burn the monster alive with magical fire. Must cleanse the king's bloodline before it's too late. Facing the chaos akin to an Inquisition trial, Elder Velius raised his scepter high into the air, signaling for silence. He aimed his old, murky yet fully threatening eyes straight at Valerius. Valerius, your prestige and dignity in the eyes of the tribes are being shaken to the very core. Hearing those judgments, Kale stood to the side, trying to bite his lip tightly to prevent the corners of his mouth from twitching in delight. He thought he already held absolute victory in the palm of his hand. But in his drunkenness with power and blind complacency, Kale had miscalculated one thing. A fatal mistake that he would have to pay for with his life and soul. In the eye of the hostility storm, Valerius leaned down slightly. His massive hand gently lifted the white wolf's chin. But Valerius did not let go at all. He only looked deep into her eyes and smiled. Scapegoat. Valerius's low, hoarse voice suddenly rang out. Initially, it was just gentle as a whisper of the night wind, brushing through the leaves. You people, a bunch of rotten trash, demanding the life of my mate to be a scapegoat? The two words "my mate" had just escaped Valerius's mouth, and they acted like a taboo spell, suspending all activities in space and time. Before any brain in the Great Hall could process that shocking information, Valerius decided to end all endurance. His calm, indifferent shell was completely torn apart, exposing the most savage primal nature. Crack! The monolithic floor tiles under Valerius's feet could not withstand the pressure, shattering into fine dust particles. A dark red energy pillar, thick and rolling like an erupting volcano's lava, exploded from deep within Valerius's body. The supreme lichen pressure, the lichen aura of the Wolf King, was fully released 100%, no longer holding back even a single ray of restraint. The air inside the Great Hall was instantly drained, creating an artificial vacuum environment. Outside in the sky, a terrifying and magnificent astronomical phenomenon appeared. The pitch-black, thick clouds that had covered the sanctuary for centuries were suddenly torn in half by an invisible force. The terrifying, absurd pressure from the lichen aura crushed down on every living creature present in the space. Hundreds of alphas, those who just a minute ago were roaring for murder, arrogant about their own strength, suddenly felt as if an iron mountain was weighing heavily on their shoulders. The sturdy thrones of the elders trembled wildly like autumn leaves, then cracked into large chunks. Kyle and Alara were the ones taking the heaviest hit as they stood near the epicenter. Both were hurled violently against the stone wall, behind by the horrific pressure. Yet, amidst the cruel, majestic scene, when thousands of enemies were whimpering at his feet, Valerius didn't even bother to give them half a glance. Valerius took a stride forward, his movements elegant yet full of authority. He slowly knelt on one knee, onto the stone floor, littered with broken glass shards in front of the white wolf. You have endured more than enough, my Isolde, Valerius spoke, his vocal range this time turning warm, tolerant, and heart-wrenchingly gentle. His words were completely in contrast to the cruel destruction seen all around, like a love song sung in the middle of a bloody battlefield. Tightly gripping the evil collar in his hand, Valerius slowly closed his eyes. He actively expanded his mind to the limit, without any defense. He used his very own soul to shatter the dark seal layer imprisoning her mind. Feeling the absolute resonance from the power of the Wolf King, the Silver Wolf bloodline, the incredibly rare, legendary Silver Wolf lineage, carrying the power of the stars that had been sealed for 1,000 years, began to awaken. The rune-inlaid dark collar on the wolf's neck emitted piercing, broken screeches, painful like a demon's cry. Shatter for me. Valerius let out a roar echoing throughout heaven and earth. Boom! A deafening explosion tore through the space. The evil dark collar could not continue to bear the massive pressure from both sides. At the exact moment the vicious curse was officially broken, an aurora pillar of blinding, brilliant light. The perfect crystallization between the sparkling silver of the stars and the authoritative crimson of the blood moon violently exploded from the white wolf's position. From within the center of that surreal pillar of light, a miracle of life and magic began to take place. The form of the tiny white beast began to melt, to transform. When the blinding aura gradually dissipated, leaving sparkling light dust falling like a meteor shower, all living creatures in the great hall simultaneously opened their eyes. The scene unfolding before their eyes made everyone completely hold their breath, forgetting even to breathe. Standing in the center position, right next to the towering figure of Lycan King Valerius, was no longer a cursed, lowly, and filthy wild beast. She wore a sheer dress woven from her very own light energy source, accentuating her alluring and graceful curves. Isolde, the true Silver Luna, the legendary Silver Wolf Queen descending only once every 1,000 years in the world, the one carrying the power to cleanse the darkness, had officially awakened, breaking all shackles. Chapter 9. The Awakening of the Supreme Bloodline and the Justified Punishment. The atmosphere at the Great Hall of the High Council had never been so stifling and steeped in the scent of death as this. At the position reserved for sinners, Isolde stood there, a slender, gaunt silhouette, yet as straight as a spear that would never yield. Her face was incredibly pale. Her exquisite features seemed to become even more fragile under the cold light. The killing intent radiating from Valerius's massive and majestic body was so thick that it could almost be seen with the naked eye, a pitch-black fog, swirling with fiery red lightning. On the other side of the hall, separated by a wide courtyard, paved with cold, pure white marble stones, Kyle and Alara were standing. Isolde of the Silver Moon clan, the booming, hoarse voice carrying the absolute authority of the Grand Elder rang out, slamming into the mossy stone walls and echoing agonizing sounds. He leaned forward, his eyes clearly showing contempt. The space was eerily silent. Isolde remained standing still, her pale lips pressed tightly. Seeing Isolde not reacting, Kale pretended to step forward half a step, his face twisting into an expression of fake sorrow, so sickening it was nauseating. Alara also timidly huddled against Kale's shoulder, bringing a silk handkerchief up to dab her dry eyes. "Yes, my lords," a low deafening growl, shaking the hard stone floor underfoot, emitted from Valerius's throat. That sound was like the roar of an evil dragon waking up in the abyss. "A bunch of ridiculous trash," Valerius roared, his voice not echoing but deafeningly crushing every other sound in the room. The explosive fury of a supreme Lycan was a destructive pressure. The air in the hall was abruptly drained, however, relying on the fact that she was standing before the High Court and had the protection of ancient law. Alara gritted her teeth and sneered, her shrill voice ringing piercingly, "Alpha King Valerius, you are powerful, but you are letting lust and infatuation cloud your reason." The Grand Elder regained his composure, slamming his scepter forcefully onto the stone floor, creating a loud explosion. "Valerius, even though you are the King of the North, you do not have the right to interfere with the High Council's judgment. The evidence is clear. The defendant cannot defend herself, the court declares." Before Alara could smile in triumph, and before the Grand Elder could finish his sentence, Isolde gently reached out her hand. She placed her long, cold, slender fingers onto Valerius's sinewy arm that was as taut as a bowstring. Valerius looked into her eyes, the killing intent on him pausing slightly. He saw the confidence, the absolute determination in those eyes. Isolde turned her face back, facing the High Council, facing Kale and Alara. She took a deep breath. At that exact moment, something inside Isolde shattered. It was not the collapse of spirit, but the breaking of a dark, cold prison that had imprisoned her soul for many long years. Now the very most primal, pure, and great energy source was surging up from the deepest depths of her bloodline, like a searing lava stream burning away all remnants of darkness, yet carrying the silence of absolute ice. A silvery, blinding light like a full moon on the most freezing winter night began to leak out from Isolde's body. Initially just a blurry aura surrounding her skin, but in a blink of an eye, it violently exploded like a galactic explosion. Isolde threw her head back, her two eyes squeezed shut, a low moan, full of pain but also extremely refreshing, escaping from her throat, pulling along the awakening of an ancient power. What is this? That light, impossible. An elder screamed frantically, raising a hand to shield his blinded eyes from the excessively blinding light. What magic is this? Stop her! Cale yelled, stepping backward, sheer terror clearly showing on his distorted face. But his body was locked tight in place, unable to budge. The pressure of a supreme bloodline collapsed down onto the entire hall, heavy as an entire Mount Tai crashing down. It was not rough, bloodthirsty, and brutal like a Lycan's killing intent, but arrogant, pure, absolute, sacred, and irresistible. Thud! Thud! No one could resist that divine pressure, ingrained deeply into the genetic instinct. The 12 authoritative elders, those who had just proclaimed themselves as representatives of the law, simultaneously slid off their thrones of power. Only Valerius alone remained standing firm amidst that silver light storm. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking at her. On the other side, Cale and Alara had completely collapsed. They were crushed flat onto the ground, their faces scraping against the cold marble layer, their chests compressed by magic pressure so tightly that their ribs creaked, seemingly about to shatter. The cold wind gradually dissipated, the silver light softened, condensing into an invisible magical crown on top of Isolde's head, emitting sparkling light rays. Her body now radiated an ethereal beauty, untouchable yet making people want to kneel and worship. She took a step, slowly advancing toward the prostrated Cale and Alara. The sound of her shoe heels tapping on the desolate marble floor sounded like the toll of an execution bell, echoing each beat into the eardrums of the sinners. And then she spoke. Her larynx had been completely healed by the primal magic stream. Cale of the Blood Moon clan, Alara of the Shadowfang clan, Isolde spoke, every word sharp as ice blades slicing into their flesh. Do you really think that a little of your filthy darkness can permanently eclipse the moonlight? Cale trembled violently, opening his mouth panting, trying to squeeze out every word, but his throat was bitterly choked, unable to utter a sound. The authority of the Silver Wolf bloodline made the lowly wolf within him shrink into a dark corner, pitifully begging for forgiveness, daring not to have a single ray of resistance. You slandered me, humiliated me, used the most despicable tricks, used the poison-laced dark collar to lock my soul tight, destroying my larynx. Isolde raised a long, pure white, slender hand. From her fingers, brilliant silver magic threads shot out at lightning speed, tightly wrapping around Alara and Cale's bodies, pinning them securely down to the floor. Ah, help! Help me! Alara screamed miserably, the piercing sound echoing as the silver threads mercilessly pierced through her chest, plunging deep into the bone marrow. The cleansing magic was burning away her shell of lies. Isolde clenched her fists tight, dragging straight out from Alara and Cale's chests streaks of pitch black, foul-smelling, and thick smoke. That was exactly the residue of dark magic, of the demonic pacts and the cruel plots they had executed. Those black smoke streaks floated in mid-air, forced by the silver light to writhe, then suddenly projected clear, vivid images like an illusionary play for all members of the High Council to witness. That was the scene of Cale and Alara, sneaking in the dead of night, trading with blood to hideous dark witches at the forest edge bordering the Deadlands. And most terrifying of all, causing all the elders to gape in terror, was the scene of Cale and Alara personally setting up a massive magic explosion trap filled with explosive blood crystal stones at the northern border. The truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually be exposed under the moonlight. Isolde's voice rang out, sharp, cruel, and completely devoid of emotion. She swung her hand, tossing the black smoke illusion away into dust. She turned her back on the two, lying sprawled on the ground like stray dogs in mourning, directing her authoritative, brightly shining eyes toward the 12 elders. They were still kneeling flat on the ground, cold sweat breaking out and soaking their solemn robes. High Council, Isolde spoke, every word resounding like a sledgehammer striking down. Those proclaiming yourselves the scales of justice for the werewolf world. Now with this blatant and undeniable evidence, what is your judgment? The Grand Elder trembling scrambled to lift his head, his wrinkled face now pale white, his lips turning purple from sheer terror and humiliation. He forced himself to gasp for air, his voice stammering, terrified. The crime is too clear, unforgivable. Hearing the death sentence handed down on his head, Chaol screamed frantically, struggling desperately in the silver magic threads. His eyes were bloodshot, frothing at the mouth. No. I am the Alpha. I am the supreme Alpha of the Blood Moon. I am your mate. A low string of laughter, chilling and brutal to the bone, echoed, cutting off Chaol's miserable screams. Valerius took long strides, slowly stepping forward. You, her mate? Valerius roared, his hoarse voice containing a thick killing intent so intense that it made the stones around him start to crack. You are not even worthy to lick her mud-stained boot heels, despicable stray dog. She is my life. Valerius didn't bother drawing the precious sword sheathed at his hip. He slowly reached out his massive steel-clad hand. Thwack! Valerius's hand plunged deep into the middle of Chaol's chest, piercing through the silk clothing, piercing through his firm chest, grabbing hold of his thumping heart and wolf energy core. A gurg. Chaol widened his two eyes so much they seemed about to pop out, fresh blood gushing from the corner of his mouth in large mouthfuls, soaking the white stone floor. A choked roar, painful to the very core, exceeding the endurance limits of a creature, rang out. Valerius did not rip his heart out to give him a quick death. Instead, he used the most brutal dark power stream of a Lycan, transmitting it directly into Chaol's energy core. Crack, shatter. The terrifying shattering sound of a soul echoed dryly in the quiet hall. That was the sound of an absolute rupture. Ilara instantly fainted in a pool of blood, her body convulsing violently in fits, her mouth frothing white. Chaol gasped for air, lying flat on the ground like a rotten piece of meat, a true cripple. Valerius coldly withdrew his hand, flicking it hard. Fresh blood splattered into long streaks on the floor. Take these foul-smelling piles of garbage and throw them out to the Deadlands. Do not let them die too quickly. The guards immediately rushed forward like phantoms, roughly grabbing the hair and legs of the two sinners, dragging their ruined bodies out of the hall. They looked no different from two discarded puppets with broken strings. Deadly silence enveloped the vast hall space. Not a single elder dared to breathe heavily. No one dared to raise their heads to look into the eyes of the King of the North. Valerius pulled out a black silk handkerchief, carefully wiping away the dirty blood streaks on his fingers, tossing the handkerchief to the ground, then turned around to look at Isolde. Everything is over now, my queen, he whispered, his warm, deep voice full of love, dispelling all the chill and fatigue in the room. Your enemies have paid for their crimes. Your pain has been avenged. Isolde smiled, the most radiant and beautiful smile in the world. The silver light on her retracted back into her body. She had won. She had reclaimed her honor, her power, and her life. Outside the giant windows, the ferocious blizzard also seemed to have calmed down. The thick, pitch-black clouds slowly dissipated, making way for the first silver rays of sunlight, brilliant and pure, piercing through the atmosphere, shining brilliantly onto the endless mountain peak. Chapter 10: The Holy Marking Ceremony and the Era of Ice and Fire. 1 month after the shocking event at the High Council Court, the atmosphere across the entire Northern Alliance had miraculously transformed completely. Tonight was an incredibly special night, a perfect full moon night, in the vast warm royal bedroom, with a brightly burning pink flame fireplace. Isolde was standing in front of a full-body mirror, made of ancient crystal with intricately carved patterns. Isolde's heart pounded continuously in her chest, creating bustling sounds. Nervousness, anxious anticipation, and immense happiness intertwined, filling every corner of her mind. You are truly too exquisite, Luna. It is as if the moonlight itself is present in this room. An elderly maid gently pinned the pleats of her dress back into place, whispering, her eyes brimming with tears full of worship and respect. Since the day Isolde revealed her Silver Wolf bloodline and used her divine healing power to heal the severely wounded northern warriors, who were thought to be beyond saving, as well as purifying the evil pathogens in the fortress's water source, all the subjects here had voluntarily knelt to worship her as a true savior. Thank you, Martha. Thank you, ladies. Isolde smiled gently, a smile that lit up the whole room. Her voice was clear and soft, like a babbling brook, flowing through rocks in spring. Boong! Boong! The giant horn, made of a wild beast's horn, sounded majestically from the highest observation deck of the fortress. 3 long blasts, echoing to tear through the silent night, signaling that the most sacred moment had arrived. Isolde took a deep breath, her chest heaving. At the center area of the giant square in front of the fortress was the grand 1,000-year-old ancient sacred tree. Right in the middle of the soaring altar, Valerius was clasping his hands behind his back, majestically waiting for her. Tonight he took off his usual blood-stained combat armor. As Isolde leisurely walked along the path, each of her rhythmic footsteps blended with his heart beating a fast tempo. When she stepped onto the final marble stairs advancing to the altar, Valerius waited no more. He hurriedly reached out his hand. His massive, rough hand full of war scars carefully took hold of her soft, tiny, cold hand. "You are so beautiful it makes me want to go crazy." Isolde heard that, smiled radiantly, tilting her starlight sparkling silver eyes to look straight into his eyes. "But I am here, standing before 10,000 people of the North, belonging solely to you, and will forever belong only to you alone, your Majesty, my only mate." Under the witness of the brilliant full moon, shining its rays straight down to the earthly realm, and the old high priest with a long beard touching the ground, Valerius and Isolde slowly knelt on one knee together before the smooth surface of the moonstone. "I, Valerius, the great Bloodwolf King of the North, descendant of darkness," Valerius spoke, his voice roaring like thunder. "Taking the bright moonlight above as witness, taking my immortal life as an oath. I, Isolde, the supreme silver wolf bloodline, descendant of light," Isolde followed, her voice clear as a ringing bell. "Taking the bright moonlight above as witness, taking my sacred life as an oath. I dedicate my sincere heart, primal magic, and absolute loyalty to Valerius." As soon as the final words of the oath rang out decisively, the invisible mate bond, which had already sparked and formed, deep within their souls, was now like being ignited, exploding fiercely and wildly. Valerius stood up abruptly, forcefully pulling Isolde up with him. He reached out to gently sweep her smooth platinum blonde hair over one shoulder, exposing her pure white, slender neck, a fatal weakness, but now fully exposed, offered up to him. "Let me carve my name deep into your soul, so this universe knows who you belong to," he growled low in his throat, his teeth grinding against each other. "Mark me, claim me." Isolde tilted her head back slightly, half closing her eyes, completely entrusting her entire body and soul to him in absolute trust. Without hesitating for another split second, Valerius lowered his head, opened his mouth. His 2 long fangs, sharp as razors, plunged, sinking deep into the soft physiological gland right next to the blood vessel on her neck. Isolde jolted, her whole body tensing, her fingernails gripping tightly onto his solid shoulders. A rapid, sweet moan escaped from her lovely lips. Simultaneously, at the moment the fangs sank down, the full moon overhead suddenly flared up brilliantly, radiating a blinding light, 100,000 times stronger than normal, shining a massive pillar of light straight down, covering the 2 intertwined on the stone pedestal. The ceremony was completed. The mate bond was absolutely perfected. Valerius reluctantly released his mouth from the slender neck. He stuck out his warm tongue, gently, fully reverently licking clean the final drop of fresh red blood oozing out. He wrapped his arms around her waist and legs, effortlessly lifting her high up, proudly turning around, facing the tens of thousands of subjects kneeling flat on the ground in absolute silence. Thrusting his muscular chest forward, a resounding, earth-shaking roar, carrying the authority of both king and queen, tore through the night sky from Valerius's throat. That roar was so majestic it shook the very space. Instantly, like a spark thrown into a powder keg, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of howls from the wolf packs, from the warriors, from all northern living beings simultaneously rang out in an excited response. Ow! The epic, tragic, surging sound like a tsunami shook the eternal snow-capped mountains, shocked the ancient forests, resonating beyond the furthest borders, spreading across the 5 continents and 4 seas. A new era had truly begun in this land, the most peaceful, prosperous, and brilliantly powerful era in history, under the joint reign of the invincible, brutal Blood Wolf King and the compassionate Ice Queen carrying the supreme bloodline. The quiet late night had long fallen. The sounds of instruments and singing, the celebratory cheers of the giant banquet, had gradually sunk into the blurry mist of silence. A massive, solid, and strong pair of arms wrapped around her waist, totally embracing her slender figure from behind. The familiar, passionate warmth enveloped her, blocking all freezing winds of the dark night. "What are you thinking about, my beloved Luna?" he asked gently, his warm, sexy voice brushing against her ear. Isolde lightly tilted her head, obediently leaning her entire back against his broad, solid as Mount Tai chest, smiling an incredibly contented and peaceful smile. "I was thinking about the long string of days, drowning in the sorrow of the past. It felt like an endless, dark, and cold nightmare that would never have an exit." She tiptoed, taking the initiative to place a passionate, deeply intoxicated kiss on his lips. Valerius immediately tightened his grip on her waist, responding wildly, intensely. "The blizzard has passed, the dark night has retreated.